Well, so this last section of the homeostasis unit is on interactions, and this first part here is interactions between animals. A little different than photoperiodism, which was the previous topic, which is plants monitoring the night length to determine the time of the year it is and appropriate behaviors as a result. Um, in animals, internal and external signals regulate a whole range of physiological processes that synchronize with environmental cues and environmental cycles. The changing of the seasons causes display behavior in animals like reproductive behavior. The males of many species engage in reproductive displays to attract mates only at certain times of the year. With North American deer, this is in October and November. With the elk, it's also in the winter so that the babies are born at the correct time of the year. Depending on the length of gestation, mating seasons can be, oh, spelling error, gotta fix that. They can be at any time of the year. White-tailed deer in North America engage in mating behavior in the fall months to time birthing to the spring. Most bird species engage in mating behavior in the early spring in time to time the hatching to the emergence of insects. So we have the pigeons on the left. The male is actually doing a mating display for the female, and he's actually mooning her to impress her. So over here on the left, we have this display, which only happens at certain times of the year. This also is only going to happen at certain times of the year, and that is to time the birth of the offspring to the most optimal weeks of the year when they have the greatest chance of surviving. Now, the next topic here is even in non-animal organisms, environmental cues also serve to regulate all kinds of physiological responses. Remember, this is all about homeostasis, trying to keep things internally constant. In many species of fungi, fruiting body formation is timed by soil temperature and moisture. All edible fungi are commercially grown under conditions that favor fruiting body formation. They're basically grown in drawers, in large cabinets, in mulch, in a carefully regulated temperature, light cycle environment to maximize the things that are made. Generally, a carefully prepared mulch mix combined with proper humidity and mulch temperature will increase the reproductive cycle of a fungus. Different mating types will generally fuse cells, and the nuclei will fuse to undergo meiosis and genetic recombination. And after that, a fruiting body grows to disperse genetically distinct spores far and wide. So on the left over here, we have a typical sac fungus, which is has reproduced, and it's made these spores. These spores have all been made from the meiosis of a cell. They're going to be thrown out into the air to grow in new environments. These are the morels above ground. This is underground. This is above ground. This structure grows so that these spores will actually have a chance to fly away. It's hard to say exactly what these cells are. It's possible these are just a group of mycelium cells underground, but the sac fungi actually make little rods that do look like those. But this is the part you can't see of a fungus. It grows in the ground, but it's very sensitive to environmental cues. And when the environment's right, it'll make these. These are the above ground structures whose job is to drop out tiny little cells like those in the air so that the morels can grow in other locations. That's definitely an environmentally stimulated thing that's causing differential gene expression inside the morels to make all this stuff happen. And that brings us down here to animals act on information and communicate it to others. So when an animal observes something, especially social animals, they attempt to communicate this to the animals around them. Turns out that innate behaviors are important to fitness. Innate behaviors are things like a cockroach has, that its taxis, random locomotion, increases cockroach survival during escape. Cockroaches are difficult to kill because they run in random directions when disturbed. But that kind of behavior is definitely a fit thing for them. Then there's imprinting. In these ducklings, the little babies saw their parents right when they were born, and these are geese, not ducks, but these baby geese saw their parents when they were born, and their brains were programmed to follow the first large object that they witnessed after they're born. If it was a human, they will just follow a human around. The goslings are more fit if they stick with their parents than if they weren't with their parents, and that's a communication thing. The parents being in the environment of the goslings allowed them to imprint on them and then increase their fitness in following wherever they went. Reproductive, this is insane, but this is a tiny little bird feeding a larger bird, and the reason this is happening is because we have a reed warbler is feeding a cuckoo bird. This is called brood parasitism. See the nest here? The reed warbler laid an egg in that nest. So did a cowbird. Cowbirds don't raise their own babies, they let other birds do it. This cowbird kicked out the baby reed warbler that was in the nest, and now the parents are feeding this voracious little chick here. That is called reproductive parasitism, and it's one species using another species to raise its young, which is kind of a behavioral parasitism, but nevertheless it is a parasitism. All of these are examples of animals acting on information. The cowbird had to see the reed warbler nest. It laid an egg in the nest, and the baby hatched in the nest. It's, doing things at the right time and communicating that information to, the organisms around you. It's the next topic and one of the last ones in the chapter here. Responses to information and communication of information are vital to fitness. Plant phototropism is absolutely critical for survival. Plants often grow in very crowded conditions. The plants that absorb the most light win. Auxin is important to bending the stems towards the light to maximize the amount of free energy that's available to the plant for photosynthesis. That makes the plant more likely to survive and reproduce. Plant photoperiodism is not an unimportant physiology either, because if a plant can't time the correct behaviors throughout, or its correct responses throughout the year, the plant won't survive or its offspring won't survive. So the plant has to carefully monitor the time of the year using phytochrome, and as internal hormone labels change in response to the internal phytochrome levels, the plant will respond appropriately and produce offspring at the right time of the year. The last one is migration. Migration is an incredible example of an animal using environmental cues and responding appropriately. The monarch butterfly is a serial migrator. Basically, migration is an automatic long-distance and regular animal movement. Birds exhibit classic return migratory behavior induced by changing season, but the monarch butterfly exhibits serial migration circuits where 3 to 4 generations of butterflies fly out and around in a circuit and then come back to where the original roosting places were. In the case of the monarch, they overwinter in Mexico, and they fly northeastern up to as far as the Great Lakes, and then they turn and fly back. But the butterflies that actually left on the journey won't make it back. It'll be their offspring that make it back. So it's called a serial migration as a result. And then that brings us to the last topic here, cooperative behavior within or between populations contributes to the survival of the populations. And I've already mentioned human gut bacteria and how important they are to human health. But there is an amazing organism on planet, lichens. This is reindeer moss. It is the combination of a fungus and an algae. And the fungus can grow because the algae feeds it, because the algae can photosynthesize, but the algae can grow in places that it would never be able to grow without the fungus, which is the tops of mountains and the sides of hills. where most algae have to be in the pond. So the algae and the fungus help each other. Turns out the fungus cannot live without the algae, but the algae can live without the fungus. That's been determined. There is also extreme symbiosis in a number of plant and insect species where arthropods like the hover moth pollinate like this lantana, and in so doing they propagate the lantana while themselves being fed by nectar. Orchids, which are the largest family of flowering plants, have some of the strangest pollinating phenomena. Many orchid flowers resemble basically the reproductive parts of female insects, and so the flower becomes the mating partner to male insects that are flying by. Most flowers offer nectar to insects and birds to get them to return for transferring pollen. Both the insect and the bird benefit from the association, and so not only is that a mutualism, but it's a coevolutionary mutualism. Some plant species, though, have gone extinct because their pollinator went extinct, and this has happened throughout the history of Earth, certainly. Hawaiian honey creepers were a classic example. Most of the honey creepers are now extinct, and that's resulted in the loss of a number of native orchids that they used to pollinate. So this concludes the homeostasis unit in its entirety.